Thanks for that, Jirka. My name is Nordström. I've been doing angle brackets since they were called STML. I've been also doing a lot of other things, among them film projection, which I wanted to mention because there was a person from Dolby here yesterday, and I just have this Dolby fetish.
Go ahead. I'm just doing that.
I own, I don't know, a dozen and a half old Dolby sound processors meant for cinemas. So yeah, leaving that for now, I'm going to mostly talk about VIN numbers, DITA, and a bit of iXML. And so let's just start. Right, vehicle identification numbers. If you own a car, you will have one of those. It will be stamped on your engine block or maybe on a steel plate, on the windscreen somewhere. You can find them pretty much anywhere. The weird things, they look like this, sort of 17 characters of information. Now these list the config of that particular vehicle, and they can identify an individual vehicle. And if you look at them from a slightly different perspective, you can see that they're position-driven things. So you can pass these sort of things, and those of you doing iXML will know where it is leading. VIN numbers been done in the US around 1950s, but it's been a painful road for them, pun intended. And the fact is that even today, some 70 years maybe after the fact, this kind of isn't a standard because, everyone should have their own standard. And that's how you do it. So you can see here that there are plenty of standards, but they all implement it differently, and they don't always implement it the way this table says. I grabbed this from Wikipedia. It's sort of half true here, but close enough. So there's a lot of standardization to be had here. And I'm not about to suggest anything like that, so let's go on to the next topic. Yeah, I know, obvious, right? DITA profiling. How many of you know what DITA is? Fair number. All right. So a DITA looks like this, and I'm not interested in explaining to you a whole lot about DITA, except for these things here. So one thing about DITA, firstly, is that it's all about building blocks, and it's all about reusing those building blocks in any number of ways. But reuse is easy for the first 95% or so. The last 5% are always a nightmare. So what most DITA is, this is by no means only DITA. So DITA is an example. I'll get to that in a bit, why. But you have a product attribute here that says this particular topic applies to product A, and it applies to an audience equaling experts. So you might have, another value saying beginner, product B, C, D, etc. But importantly, remember that building block analogy, because that's what they are. You combine your building blocks into usable topic manuals. So a single DITA topic doesn't have a context. It's supposed to live by its own. It should completely describe a topic. But since you need to profile those sometimes, you need to tell that this applies to product A and audience experts. It's not that easy. Now, DITA's got something known as maps. They're basically just more XML linking to those topics, reusing those topics, in some order, in some fashion. Maps are what creates hierarchies for DITA, so there's no chapter hierarchy in DITA, in a DITA topic. So here, in this case, we've got a map linking to 3 topics. The first one is applies to product A. Second one doesn't have a profile, so it applies to everything. That's the logic. If it doesn't have a profile, it always applies. It's always included. And doc 3 here, the third topic, is about product B. So if you publish that map in context A, so you're just sending it out to publish, doing some XSLT and some XSLFO, getting a PDF, and if you say to your publishing process that I want it for product A, this is what you get. You just exclude everything that's not product A, or doesn't have profiling. So they select a subset. They select a profile, some perspective of that total map. But we can profile anything, not just the topics themselves. We can go inside a topic. We can say that this paragraph applies to A, this applies to B, and this applies to everything. And when we publish that in context A for product A, this is what we get. Again, we exclude something that is not important for this context. There's plenty of system support for DITA, obviously. Our friends at Oxygen have loads of support. We publish this, so you can go home and test profiling, and it will just work. I'll show you one system then. So things happen in a context. My context here is that I was building a portal, thing built on XDB that serves XML documents and publishes those documents on the fly. Those of you who listened to my talk at Balisart last year will know a lot more about that portal, because that was a topic by itself. Importantly, this is publishing, again, DITA on the fly. So we store DITA as is in XDB. We click buttons and we can publish. Let me see if I can do a very quick demo. So this is a live version of that portal. You'll see, I'll just sit down because this tends to go really badly if I'm standing still. So we can, for instance, and this is test data, by the way, this is customer data, so I'm not going to publish anything. But here, you can basically select your profiling attribute. Remember that product, remember that audience. So we might select audience, and we'll get a selectable list of profiles for audience. Happens to be regions for this particular manufacturer. Or we might select engine type, and there's going to be a single profile there, and I can do a search. And up here, you will note that I found my single topic with the profile petrol_EU4. That's an actual thing, by the way. No idea why it's called EU4, but it's an actual thing. Let me go back to the portal then and the slides. So you may have guessed that interface was all XML technologies. That was an X form. We're obviously converting the DITA on the fly, so everything we see there, it's from the actual sources. For instance, the file list on the right, that's a list of XML files generated by the database and presented in an X form. The browse button is another example. You can actually look at the DITA map structures. That's why you see all these browse buttons here. So that file list is a bit of XML, pre-generated, because if you have 1 or 2 gigs of data, that will take a while. everything. So it's pre-generated, so you can just serve the right kind of file. So if we look at the file list here, single file, can you see this properly, hopefully? So for instance, for a single file, I'm obviously pointing out where it lives, because I'll need that information. For DITA context, I'm also saying that, well, this thing here is applicable to these two profiles. Audience, same thing. There's always some DITA notation that is useful for processing later on. So it basically says the same thing here. Loads of other things, it's just a subset. Obviously, you need to list the title, because otherwise your X form would be empty. And you saw this one. This is another X form. We just select things, and once I'm selecting, I'm clicking search, as you saw. What happens in the background is that it generates this tiny little piece of XML, which is the filter. So I'm basically just applying this filter to my file view to get what I need to show, reorder the list, and put them on top, or anything else I might want to do. So thinking about VIN numbers for chains again, because a VIN does describe a configuration of a vehicle, a car. It will also describe applicability, but it's very different from a DITA profiling approach, two very different things. And I can tell you that there's no standard implementation of VIN numbers, because there is no standard in several, and most of those are tied to ERP systems, the things people use to handle their businesses, that sort of thing. And the question becomes, can we actually combine those two? Well, glad you asked, or me. Because, so iXML, I read Stephen's paper in, I think, 2013, when it first came out, reviewed it. I thought, this is really cool. I wonder if there's a use for it, and I couldn't see one, but that's just me being stupid, right? I again read sort of a slight development of that paper for XMLPrague a year later, maybe half a year later. And I thought, still very cool. Can't see a use there, but I mean, it's a nice exercise. Yeah, that's me. That's how stupid I am. I'm not going to explain how that works, because Steve did a much better job of that. But essentially what you do is you express a grammar of your implicit structure, basically like EBNF or something like that, if you know that sort of thing. And you then are able to serialize that in XML formats, which is really cool. You make explicit markup. So I'm not going to do this, because this is just your dates example. I think I borrowed this from either Stephen or Norm on the website. So if you have a date like this, you can get XML like this, and I not tidy anything up. And I suppose you'll see now where this is going, because VIN numbers, for this client, again, there are several standards, so that would equal several grammars, different, and they would not be compatible with each other, because they do implement those 17 positions very differently, some of them. But this particular client has, and it's not this one you see here, but they've got very well-defined use of VINs. So I thought, how hard can it be, right? So I wrote an iXML grammar for that, for the VIN. It was an Excel spreadsheet, actually, with all the values listed, all the letters and all that stuff. So, for instance, here's the actual expression. You've got things like the manufacturer ID that always comes first. This, by the way, will frequently, not always, dictate the rest of the string, but that's neither here nor there. And so on vehicle types, for instance, you got commercial vehicles, you got private vehicles, so ambulances versus private citizen-owned vehicles, that sort of thing. Model years, all that stuff. It's just a grammar. So we can now serialize this thing as XML, which is kind of cool. So let's briefly go back to that demo again, hoping that this will work. I will need to fix a value here. So the actual portal is very highly configurable. So, and this is a config file. So I can do any kind of thing. And so if I go back to the portal and refresh, we are going to get a new X form. So just if I start writing, it will just start complaining. There's a check going on, making sure that I don't mistype. I don't want to mistype, so I have that on my clipboard. And now this look up VIN button appears. So I can look up the VIN. This is actually slower for some reason if I share the screen. I find that really interesting because it's instantaneous if I don't. So I can list what that VIN number actually means very specifically by parsing that string using iXML. So basically what's behind the scenes here is basically more X forms and coffee pot by Norm. And so, let me see, it's a bit tight here. So if I look for that, voila. Again, at the top, I'm finding my petrol EU4 document. This time, I'm using the VIN to find the exact same thing. So going back to the slides. Well, you saw this. No need to go into that much further. I'll say this, that the values you see there, they're all raw values. The actual client implementation translates all of that and localizes it. So it doesn't actually say vehicle type or platform or engine type, camel case or anything like that. It just spells them out. But that's nor here nor there. What can we do with the XML that is produced by CoffeePot? Well, we get this sort of thing. And the filtering you just saw was done by converting that thing into a tiny little XML that filters my file list and gets me what I want. But I can also generate what is known as a DITA val filter. So for those of you who know DITA, that's kind of an XML file that is sent along with the rest of your DITA when you're publishing, and that is basically a filter that gives you that context in which your DITA map is published. So I can just generate those, and it just works. I'm not allowed to show you what happens when I publish because there is customer information in there, but this talk was not about that anyway. The cool thing is, though, you can also go in the other direction, because if you have your portal, so you have the live implementation does have a lot more values available, so not just audience and product and engine type, all kinds of things. So you can also go in the other direction. So you can play around with your profiles. I want, car for the New Zealand market, just the left-hand drive, just the petrol EU4 engine. I don't know if that's a thing, but you can do that. You can convert that back to a VIN number. So it's kind of a round trip. And if you think about that, you know, you can actually generate a range of VINs. So if you're doing a recall letter, say, as a car manufacturer, you don't want to send that email to everyone. You just want to send that to those affected. So you know what profile that is because you're looking at the portal, you're playing around with the profiles. But you can then use that to generate a VIN range. So not just a specific VIN string, but the range. You can also use that for any number of other things. You can use the range to actually find spare parts in an ERP system. So SAP, for instance, you might just feed that into loads of my customers are into Salesforce, which is a horrible, horrible thing, but that's what it is. And you can just feed that into Salesforce and you'll get loads and loads of parts applicable to that particular individual car, which is kind of cool. So, in closing, I think that I was so dead wrong about iXML, so it hurt. So I wrote this paper and I wrote another iXML paper for Balisage to be presented in August. And it's really cool in practical, the real world out there. So next steps for this one is, well, you may have noticed that there wasn't all that much actual profiles in the DITA. That's a problem. It's not an implementation problem, it's a source problem. They need to enrich the DITA if they're actually going to use this thing properly, which they really can't because the DITA content is not smart enough. Now, I do need to expand the VIN grammar because that basic grammar covers the only manufacturing plant they have. They will have new model years. That's dictated by one of the ISO standards that dictates how VIN numbers work, but they're not in the grammar currently. There may be additional features specific to a new model, things like that, so the grammar needs to be updated. And the VIN-based integration with ERP systems, that's yet to come properly. So with that, thank you very much. Any questions before we close this conference?
We have time for questions. Oh, yeah.
Very interesting presentation. I also came across VIN once, and I also realized, oh, that's a lot more complicated than I would have assumed at first sight. Is there, I mean, there must be some kind of definition what actually, like semantically, is a VIN or not? Or, I mean, it's not just cars, it's motorcycles, I assume, trucks. Can you be sure that when something has a VIN, that it's not a boat or a, I don't know, plane?
You can, but you need to look at the registry because most of these are registered. They're not standardized, but the manufacturing code that starts 3 characters, I believe, that will tell you what it is. Well, sort of, because then the 4th and the 5th, I believe, would tell you what kind of vehicle it is. For this manufacturer, they have 2 basic types, or 3 maybe. So it's not a problem, but you cannot universally rely on that because you have these differing implementations. And this car manufacturer, they are based in Europe, but they are closer to the US definition of VINs for whatever reason.
So I saw a great talk. Thank you. Really interesting. Great to see it being used in the wild. So I saw that for the year, for instance, you converted them into element names like Y22.
Yeah.
Is there a reason you did that rather than doing insertions and just having one element year and then the content with 2022?
Yeah. So you'd need to match those to letters in.
Yeah, but you can, well, you can do that.
You can
with
certainly do
insertions.
that, but it did not occur to me at the time. The answer is as simple as that.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk on the the practical insight in how industrial tech publishing, what the challenges are. And you mentioned that the companies have in their ERP systems, they know everything based on the VIN. They know the color of the car, they know the tires initially shipped with the car, and they most probably know in which country the car was shipped originally. And some even take track and change the car, changes ownership. They get notified and they can kind of send, if you have the car bought in Germany and then sold to someone in Finland, and that person in Finland has the chance to get the original manual in Finnish based on the original specs of the car.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And so there is a lot of the full bill of materials is in there, and the car industry is kind of lucky that they have this VIN specification. Every machinery manufacturer nowadays, they have just the serial number, and they have their back-end system, hopefully, and they have exactly the same problem enriching the content to make this. What I once read a paper that how you create the content is the name for this that I read once. It was master document and fragmented reuse by filtering away everything you don't want. That is one way to do it. There are other ways as well, getting all the information from the beginning, the sales process, through to manufacturing and documentation, getting that through, that is the main challenge in the industry, to enrich the content, as you described with these examples. And so I'm very happy that is our daily job to handle things like that. And that was a very practical example of how XML and automated processes work. Thank you very much for that.
Okay. I should add that so you would think that the VIN was somehow the truth and nothing but. That's not the case. So the VIN will cover a basic configuration. It will not cover everything. On the other hand, the ERP systems will have other information. They will have sales codes in addition to your VIN number. Those are mapped in the ERP. There's no standard for that. But there's more information as part of your sales code and the relations in that database. And I could even add to the fact that if you look at the engineering data, you will most likely have, a PLM, SLM system like Windchill or Teamcenter, and you will have, again, very different metadata. So,
thank you. I have one question. I find the proximity between VIN and diesel at the same sentence confusing, but that's me.
do you need me to address that?
Sorry. Okay, no other question? Thank you very much.
Thank you.